The auditorium was decorated with bright lights, velvet curtains, and shining golden seats. It was the kind of place where only the wealthy and the famous usually gathered. That evening, a charity event was taking place, hosted by one of the most popular singers of the time. People came dressed in sparkling gowns, expensive suits, and polished shoes. Photographers stood at the entrance, clicking pictures of celebrities as they stepped onto the red carpet. The hall buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the proud sound of people showing off their importance. Among this glamorous crowd, a simple woman sat quietly in the third row. Her dress was plain, made of soft fabric without glitter or shine. She wore simple sandals, and her hair was tied back in a modest bun. She had not come here to show off or to be noticed. In fact, she had never dreamed of sitting in such a place. She was there only because her close friend had invited her, insisting she should attend just once to see how such events looked. She had no expectations. She wanted to sit quietly, enjoy the music, and go back home without drawing any attention to herself. The famous singer was the center of attention, as always. He had a tall figure, perfect hair, and a smile that looked rehearsed. He walked across the stage with confidence, waving at the audience as if every clap and cheer belonged only to him. People admired him, some even screamed his name. He was used to it. For years he had performed in front of thousands, and he had become proud, sometimes too proud. He believed no one could reach his level of talent. In his heart, he often looked down on ordinary people, thinking they could never match him. As he looked across the audience that evening, his eyes landed on the simple woman. She caught his attention not because she was glamorous, but because she was the opposite. In a hall full of sparkling people, she looked plain, almost invisible. He smirked to himself. A thought crossed his mind, a cruel, playful idea. What if he brought her onto the stage? What if he asked her to sing? The crowd would laugh, and he would have his moment of superiority, proving again that talent belonged only to him. The host announced his name, and the singer walked up to the microphone, pretending to be friendly. He cracked a few jokes, made the audience laugh, and sang one of his famous songs. The applause was loud, but inside, he still wanted something extra to make himself stand out. That was when he decided to put his cruel idea into action. He looked directly at the simple woman, sitting nervously in her seat, and pointed toward her. "You there," he said loudly, smiling as though he was offering kindness, but his eyes carried mischief. "Why don't you come up here and join us? Let's have some fun with the audience tonight. A brave volunteer, ladies and gentlemen." His voice boomed across the hall. The woman froze in her seat. At first, she thought he was speaking to someone else, maybe the person sitting behind her. But when everyone around her turned to look, she realized he meant her. Her heart began to beat faster, and her palms grew sweaty. She wanted to shake her head and say no, but the crowd was already cheering, clapping, encouraging her to stand. Her friend beside her whispered, "Go on, it's just for fun." Reluctantly, with trembling legs, she stood up and walked toward the stage. The spotlight followed her, making her even more nervous. She had never been on a stage like this in her entire life. She worked a simple job, lived a modest life, and only sang to herself when she was alone, never in front of strangers. As she stepped onto the stage, the singer placed a microphone in her hand, smiling in a way that made her feel small. "Don't be shy," he said, pretending to encourage her but clearly mocking. "Show us what you've got." The audience laughed softly. Some people whispered to each other, expecting a funny disaster. A few even took out their phones, ready to record what they believed would be a moment of embarrassment for this ordinary woman. The singer leaned back, crossing his arms, waiting to enjoy the scene he had created. The woman looked at the microphone in her hand. Her fingers shook as she held it close to her chest. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring at her, waiting for her to fail. For a moment, she thought about running back to her seat. But something inside her whispered that maybe she should at least try. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and tried to steady herself. Her mind went back to her childhood, to the small kitchen where she used to hum songs while cooking with her mother. She remembered singing while cleaning the house, while walking alone at night, and while taking care of her younger siblings. Music had always been in her heart, but it was never something she thought the world would hear. It was private, personal, almost sacred. Yet here she was, standing under bright lights, forced into the spotlight, with no escape. The singer bent down slightly and said with a smirk, "Come on now, don't keep us waiting. Or are you too scared?" His words stung. She lifted her eyes, and for the first time, she felt a spark of courage. If he wanted her to fail, maybe she could surprise him. She didn't know how the crowd would react, but she decided she would sing not for them, not even for him, but for herself. The music band, confused but ready, looked at her. One of the musicians asked softly, "Do you know a song?" She nodded slowly, naming a simple melody she had loved since childhood. The band adjusted their instruments, giving her a soft introduction. The hall grew quiet, waiting. The laughter and whispers stopped for a moment, replaced by curiosity. The woman held the microphone tightly, closed her eyes, and let the first notes escape her lips. Her voice trembled at first, weak and soft, almost like a whisper. A few people chuckled, thinking their expectations were correct. But within seconds, her voice steadied. She took another breath and let her heart lead her. The notes became clearer, the tone richer, filled with emotion that no training could ever teach. The hall began to shift. People leaned forward, their smiles of mockery slowly fading into surprise. The famous singer, still standing beside her, felt his smirk weaken. He did not expect even the slightest hint of talent. Yet what he heard was something real, something pure. The audience grew silent, listening closely. The woman's simple voice carried honesty and beauty, something missing in the polished performances they were used to. Each word she sang seemed to reach deep into their hearts. The laughter was gone. The hall was no longer mocking her, it was holding its breath. And in that moment, the singer realized he had made a mistake. What he thought would bring him glory was about to do the opposite. The microphone felt heavy in the woman's hand as the last note of her first line floated into the air. The audience had fallen into a strange silence. A few seconds earlier, people had been whispering, giggling, and pointing at her as if she were part of a comedy show. But now, their expressions were changing. Some leaned back in surprise, others tilted their heads, trying to figure out what was happening. The famous singer, standing beside her, forced a smile as if he was still in control, but his eyes betrayed his shock. He hadn't expected this. The woman's voice trembled again for a moment, and she almost stopped, but then she remembered the cruel smirk of the singer and the way the audience had laughed at her when she walked onto the stage. A quiet fire rose inside her heart. She told herself she could not back down now. Even if her voice cracked, even if people laughed again, she would finish what she had started. Slowly, she steadied her breathing, pressed the microphone closer to her lips, and let her heart guide the melody. Her voice grew stronger, note by note. The tremble faded, replaced by clarity and warmth. She was not trained in expensive studios or coached by professionals. Instead, her voice carried the raw beauty of honesty. Every word she sang felt as if it came from the depths of her soul. The hall was still silent, but now it was the kind of silence filled with awe. It was the silence of people realizing they were witnessing something they had never expected. In the first rows, some of the audience members who had been smiling mockingly now had their phones lifted, but not to capture a funny embarrassment. They were recording because they could not believe what they were hearing. The camera flashes began to sparkle again, this time not for the famous singer, but for the simple woman who stood on stage with closed eyes and a glowing expression. The band, who had been half ready to play lightly in the background just to support a nervous amateur, suddenly realized this was no ordinary voice. They exchanged glances, and the pianist nodded to the drummer. With gentle coordination, they began to follow her, filling the space with soft music that blended with her voice like it was meant to be. The guitarist adjusted his strings to match her pitch, and suddenly, what was supposed to be a mockery became a true performance. The famous singer shifted uncomfortably. He had thought she would stumble, forget the words, or sing out of tune. He imagined himself laughing with the crowd and then rescuing the moment by taking over, becoming the hero of the stage. But now, he felt the spotlight slipping away from him. He could sense the crowd's attention shifting fully toward her. He forced himself to clap lightly as though encouraging her, but his hands moved slowly, and his face was pale under the lights. The woman did not open her eyes. She was lost in the song, remembering the times she had sung alone. She remembered the quiet nights when she hummed to herself after long days of work, and the mornings when she sang to lift her own spirits. She remembered her late mother, who used to tell her, "You have a gift, even if no one else hears it." These memories filled her heart and gave her courage. The notes came out pure, and though her style was simple, it carried truth. By the middle of the song, something magical had happened. The audience was no longer watching her with doubt. They were leaning forward in their chairs, eyes wide, lips parted, as if afraid to miss a single sound. One woman in the audience wiped away a tear that slid down her cheek. A man beside her, who had been chuckling earlier, now sat with his arms folded tightly, staring in astonishment. Even the waiters who had been moving quietly at the back of the hall stopped in their tracks to listen. When the woman reached a high note, her voice did not break. Instead, it soared, filling the space with such intensity that people forgot they were at a charity event. They forgot about the celebrities, the glamour, the polished image of the famous singer. For those few minutes, the only thing that mattered was her voice. She sang not like someone trying to prove herself, but like someone finally setting her heart free. The famous singer could not hide his unease any longer. He turned slightly toward the audience, trying to force a grin, as if to suggest this was still part of his plan. But no one was looking at him anymore. Their eyes were fixed on the woman. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, tugging at his jacket, wishing the moment would end. Meanwhile, the woman's friend, who had been sitting in the audience, pressed her hands together tightly in excitement. She knew her friend had a sweet voice but had never imagined it could touch people like this. She felt proud, but also emotional, knowing how shy and humble the woman was. To see her standing tall on the stage, singing with such courage, filled her heart with joy. The lights on stage seemed to grow brighter, reflecting off the woman's modest dress, making her look radiant even without expensive jewels or glitter. Her plainness became her strength. The crowd saw not a superstar dressed in perfection, but a simple soul sharing something genuine. That was what moved them most. In a world where everything often looked staged and polished, her raw honesty felt like a treasure. As she sang the final chorus, her voice rose and fell like waves, gentle but powerful. The band followed her closely, their music blending seamlessly as if they had rehearsed for weeks. Yet it was completely natural, born out of the moment. By the time she approached the last line, many in the audience were already holding their breath, waiting for the final note. And then it came along, clear, heartfelt note that seemed to hang in the air like magic. The sound filled every corner of the hall, touched every listener, and left the atmosphere trembling. The audience did not even clap immediately. They sat in stunned silence for a moment, letting the beauty settle inside them. Then, suddenly, as if awakened, they erupted into applause. The sound was deafening, echoing against the walls, louder than any cheer the famous singer had received that night. The woman opened her eyes slowly. For a second, she looked confused, as if she had just woken from a dream. She saw people standing, clapping, some even whistling, and others wiping tears. She felt her cheeks grow warm. She had not expected this. She had thought people would laugh, maybe even boo. But now the entire hall was on its feet, cheering her. The famous singer clapped too, though his face looked stiff. He leaned into the microphone and tried to speak, but his words were drowned out by the cheers. For the first time in a long while, he realized he was not the star of the evening. The spotlight that he had guarded so proudly had shifted away from him. The woman, still holding the microphone, bowed slightly out of respect. She did not smile proudly or wave like a celebrity. She simply lowered her head with humility, whispering a quiet thank you that most people couldn't even hear. And yet, that simple gesture made the audience cheer louder. They admired not only her voice but also her grace and modesty. In that moment, the hall belonged to her. She had been dragged onto the stage to be mocked, but instead, she stood as the heart of the evening. The famous singer had tried to use her as a joke, but the joke had turned against him. And though she did not plan it, though she had not prepared for it, the simple woman had shown the world that true talent and courage can shine even in the most unexpected places. The applause was still echoing in the grand hall when the woman slowly stepped back, lowering the microphone. Her chest rose and fell as she caught her breath. For a moment, she thought it was all a dream. The cheering felt unreal, like waves crashing over her again and again. She looked at the audience, their faces glowing with admiration, and her heart pounded. She had never stood in front of so many people before, never been the center of attention, yet now all eyes were on her. And not with mockery, but with respect. The famous singer forced a laugh into his microphone, trying to cover his embarrassment. "Well," he said loudly, "that was unexpected." His words sounded light, but his voice carried uneasiness. The audience didn't pay much attention to him. They were still clapping for the woman. Some shouted encore, encore, while others waved for her to sing again. The singer glanced at the band, hoping they would end it quickly, but the musicians seemed just as mesmerized as the audience. They looked at the woman with admiration, nodding and smiling as if they wanted her to continue. The woman shook her head politely. She hadn't come here to perform. She had only wanted to sit quietly, watch the event, and return home. But fate had pulled her into the spotlight. She tried to hand the microphone back to the singer. He accepted it with a tight smile, but the crowd booed lightly, clearly preferring her over him in that moment. This reaction stung his pride. He had always been the star, the one everyone adored. Tonight, however, he felt like a shadow standing beside her. The audience settled slowly, but their whispers filled the hall. Some spoke about how her voice was more touching than many professionals they had heard. Others wondered who she was, why no one had ever discovered her before. A few even asked each other if she might already be a hidden artist pretending to be ordinary. The simple woman blushed under their stares, wishing she could disappear into her seat again. The host of the evening, sensing the shift, quickly stepped on stage to keep the mood alive. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "this was not planned, but tonight we have been blessed with a voice that touched our hearts. Let us thank this brave lady for sharing her gift with us." The audience roared again, clapping until the woman felt her ears ring. She waved shyly, her modest gesture only making people love her more. Meanwhile, the singer's mind raced. He felt as though the stage that once belonged to him had been stolen in a few minutes. He wondered how such a plain-looking woman could create such a powerful impact. He thought about the cameras flashing, the phones recording, and he knew those videos would spread far beyond the walls of this hall. Tomorrow, the world would see him standing awkwardly beside a woman who had outshone him without effort. He bit his lip and forced another smile, but deep down, frustration burned. The woman's friend, still seated in the audience, wiped her eyes proudly. She leaned over to the person next to her and whispered, "She's never sung in public before. Can you believe that? She always hides her voice." The person shook their head in disbelief. News of her modest background began to ripple through the crowd. Some admired her courage even more, realizing this was not the act of a professional, but of a simple soul who had been pushed into the light. As the event continued, the singer tried to regain his control. He sang another song, one of his classics that usually had people standing and cheering. But tonight was different. The audience clapped, yes, but the energy was not the same. They were polite, but distracted. Their minds were still on the woman, their conversations still circling around her voice. Some compared his performance to hers quietly, and the contrast was clear. His voice was polished, trained, and impressive, but hers carried something deeper, raw honesty that had touched their hearts. The woman sat back in her seat after stepping down from the stage, her hands still trembling. She wanted to hide her face, but everywhere she turned, people smiled at her warmly. A few strangers leaned forward from behind to compliment her softly. Others tapped her shoulder, telling her she was amazing. She felt overwhelmed. She had never been praised by so many people at once. For years, she had lived quietly, unnoticed, doing her work without expecting recognition. Now, suddenly, she was being celebrated by a hall full of strangers. During the short break in the event, a group of people approached her. One of them was a man in a suit who introduced himself as a music producer. He leaned down and said, "Ma'am, your voice is extraordinary. Have you ever thought about recording professionally? I would love to talk to you after the show." She blinked in surprise, hardly able to process his words. Before she could answer, another woman, who worked in media, offered her card, saying she wanted to feature her story. The woman shook her head, stammering, I'm not anyone special. I was just lucky tonight." But the people around her disagreed. They insisted she had something rare. On stage, the singer noticed what was happening. His stomach tightened. All the opportunities, all the attention that usually flowed to him, were being pulled toward her. He forced another song, pouring his energy into it, but it was clear he was trying too hard. The audience applauded politely again, but the sparkle was gone. The night no longer belonged to him. When the event neared its end, the host once again thanked the simple woman in front of everyone. "Sometimes," he said into the microphone, "talent shines where we least expect it. Tonight, we were reminded that greatness can come from the most humble places." The audience clapped once more, many turning toward the woman with admiration. She lowered her head, embarrassed but also touched. Outside the hall, as the crowd began to leave, people stopped her to speak. Some shook her hand, others asked her name, and a few requested to take pictures with her. She answered politely, her voice soft, almost unsure how to respond to so much sudden attention. Her friend held her arm, guiding her gently through the crowd. "See," her friend whispered with a smile. "I told you, your voice deserves to be heard." The famous singer left quickly through the side door, avoiding the press. He did not want to face questions about what had happened. His pride was wounded. For years, he had mocked others, thinking no ordinary person could ever challenge his stage. But tonight, a simple woman had done exactly that, not through arrogance, but through sincerity. The more he thought about it, the heavier his heart felt. The woman, meanwhile, walked out into the cool night air, her mind still spinning. She had not asked for this. She had not prepared for it. But she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she realized that her voice could move people. For the first time, she thought that maybe, just maybe, her gift was meant to be shared. She smiled quietly to herself, not with pride, but with gratitude. She had been mocked, but what came out of it was something far greater than she ever imagined. The videos of her performance were already spreading online. By the time she reached home that night, strangers from all over the city were talking about her. Some called her the voice of the people, others said she was proof that true talent can be hidden in the most ordinary lives. While she slept, unaware, her life was already beginning to change. And in the hearts of those who were there that evening, one memory would remain forever clear: the night a famous singer tried to mock a simple woman, but instead, she sang with such honesty that she shocked the entire crowd and stole the stage without even trying. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the woman's window as she sat at her small kitchen table, sipping tea. The night before still felt like a dream. She could hardly believe she had stood on a grand stage, singing in front of hundreds of people, and that they had applauded her like she was a star. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and family who had heard about what happened. Some had already seen the video clips that were spreading quickly online. One cousin wrote, "You're everywhere this morning. Your song is all over the internet." Another message read, "You were amazing. I can't believe that was you." She put her phone down, her heart racing, unsure how to handle the sudden attention. Meanwhile, across the city, the famous singer sat in his luxury apartment, scrolling through his social media accounts. Everywhere he looked, there were videos of the woman singing. Headlines read, "Simple Woman Steals the Show at Charity Event," and "Audience in Tears After Unexpected Performance." His name was mentioned too, but not in the way he liked. People were criticizing him, saying he had tried to embarrass her but ended up embarrassing himself. Some called him arrogant, others said he had lost touch with real talent. His pride burned as he read the comments. For the first time in years, the spotlight had slipped away from him, and it was given to someone he had mocked. Back in her neighborhood, the woman went about her normal morning routine. She swept the small porch, greeted her elderly neighbor, and prepared breakfast for her younger brother, who still lived with her. He had seen the video too and looked at her with wide eyes. "You never told me you could sing like that," he said. She smiled shyly, brushing it off. "It was nothing. I just got lucky." But deep down, she knew it had been more than luck. Something inside her had finally been set free. Later that day, she received a call from the event organizers. They thanked her warmly for her bravery and told her how much her performance had meant to the audience. They even hinted that people wanted her to perform again at future events. She was stunned. "I'm not a professional," she said quickly, "I'm just a simple woman. I've never even sung on a stage before." But the organizer laughed kindly. "That may be true, but you touched hearts. Sometimes that matters more than being polished. People want to hear you again." She promised to think about it, though she still felt overwhelmed. The news channels soon picked up the story. A local reporter even knocked on her door, asking for an interview. At first, she refused, but her friend convinced her it was an opportunity to share her story. So she sat down with the reporter, speaking softly about how she had been pulled on stage against her will, how she was nervous, and how she simply sang from her heart. The interview was broadcast that evening, and once again, people were struck by her humility. Unlike celebrities who often bragged about their achievements, she spoke with sincerity, as though she herself could not believe what had happened. The famous singer, watching this unfold, felt restless. He tried to distract himself with rehearsals and meetings, but the whispers followed him everywhere. At a cafe, he overheard people talking about that woman with the golden voice. At a rehearsal, his own backup singers mentioned her performance with admiration. He grew frustrated, raising his voice, demanding that they focus on his songs instead. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not erase the memory of standing on that stage, watching her voice silence the room. The woman, on the other hand, began to receive invitations. A small community center asked her to sing at their weekend program. She hesitated but eventually agreed. The hall was nowhere near as grand as the charity event, but the people welcomed her warmly. When she sang, the audience clapped and cheered, just as they had before. She realized it wasn't just a one-time miracle. Her voice truly moved people. The more she sang, the more confident she became, though she remained humble and simple. She always said, "I'm no star, I'm just sharing what's in my heart." Weeks passed, and her story grew. More producers approached her, offering contracts, but she was careful. She didn't want to be trapped in an industry that valued fame over honesty. She wanted to remain true to herself. Still, the attention grew, and she began to realize her life would never be the same again. At the same time, the famous singer's career started to stumble. His latest concert had fewer ticket sales than expected. Some fans commented that his songs felt empty compared to the raw honesty of the woman's performance. For years, he had relied on glamour and reputation, but now people were craving authenticity. He tried harder, pushing his voice in rehearsals, but something was missing. Deep inside, he knew what it was. He had lost touch with humility, the very thing that made her shine. One evening, fate brought them together again. A charity group, impressed by both the singer's fame and the woman's newfound popularity, invited them both to perform at the same event. When she heard about it, the woman almost refused. She still remembered the way he had mocked her. But after some thought, she agreed, deciding she would not let bitterness stop her from sharing her gift. The night of the event arrived. The hall was packed, even more than before. People were curious to see the woman again and to watch how the famous singer would handle sharing the stage with her. Cameras flashed as they both arrived. The singer, dressed elegantly as always, forced smiles for the photographers. The woman, in her simple dress, walked quietly, greeted warmly by strangers who already admired her. When the show began, the singer performed first. He sang powerfully, but the crowd's applause was polite, not wild. Then it was the woman's turn. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted with cheers, standing even before she began. She felt nervous but comforted herself with the thought that she was only singing from her heart, as always. When her song began, the hall once again fell silent, her voice wrapping around every listener like a warm embrace. By the end, the applause was thunderous, shaking the hall. The singer stood backstage, watching with a mix of admiration and regret. For the first time, he realized the truth. Fame, money, and pride could not replace the power of sincerity. He had tried to mock her, but she had taught him a lesson greater than any critic ever could. As the audience cheered, the woman bowed with humility. She did not look for glory or recognition, yet it came to her naturally. People stood with tears in their eyes, whispering to each other that she was proof real talent and kindness could still exist in the world. That night ended with the woman leaving quietly, just as she had before. But the singer lingered, staring at the empty stage long after the crowd had gone. He finally understood that his arrogance had cost him more than applause. It had cost him the respect of the people. And he knew he could never forget the lesson that one simple woman had taught him in front of the entire world. The days after the second charity event brought even more changes for the simple woman. Her phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, producers, and even strangers who wanted to thank her for inspiring them. She never imagined her quiet life would turn into something like this. Just weeks ago, she had walked into a hall as a guest, unnoticed, almost invisible. Now, people recognized her on the street, smiling at her, some even asking for her autograph. It felt strange, but she stayed grounded. She still cooked breakfast for her brother, swept her porch, and greeted her neighbors just as before. Fame might have found her, but she remained the same person. Her story spread beyond her city. News outlets in other countries shared the video of her singing. Millions watched it online. The comments were filled with admiration. Her voice is pure magic. She sings with her heart, not her ego. This is what real music is. Some even said her song reminded them of their mothers, their childhood, or moments of quiet strength in their own lives. She had touched people she would never meet, all because she had been forced to sing in a moment that was meant to humiliate her. The famous singer, meanwhile, could not escape the shadow of what had happened. His face was still on posters, his songs still on the radio, but people spoke differently about him now. They no longer looked at him with the same admiration. His arrogance had been exposed. He had tried to laugh at a woman he thought was beneath him, and instead, he had lifted her higher than himself. Each time he saw her face on the news, each time he heard her voice in a new interview, he felt the weight of his mistake. For the woman, opportunities began to grow. A respected music academy offered her free lessons if she wanted to train formally. A charity organization asked her to become their ambassador, using her voice to spread hope. She was humbled, unsure how much of it she should accept. She feared losing the simplicity that gave her strength. She often told her friend, "I don't want to become someone I am not. I just want to sing when my heart tells me to." Her friend would smile and reply, "And that is exactly why people love you. Don't ever change." One evening, she was invited to a television program where they surprised her by showing clips of people around the world reacting to her performance. A group of children in another country sang her song in their classroom. An elderly man recorded himself saying her voice had reminded him of his late wife's lullabies. Tears filled her eyes as she realized how far her gift had traveled. She never sought recognition, but she had been given it because she was honest and true. At the same time, the famous singer struggled with his pride. He began to cancel some of his shows, claiming exhaustion. In truth, he was afraid of facing audiences who would see him differently now. For years, he had believed he was untouchable, the symbol of perfection. But the woman's voice had shown people something deeper than perfection. It had shown them authenticity. He felt bitterness at first, but over time, that bitterness turned into reflection. Late at night, sitting alone with his guitar, he admitted to himself that he had lost something important long before she stepped onto that stage. He had lost humility. He had forgotten why he began singing in the first place. Months passed, and the woman's life continued to blossom. She didn't become a superstar in the flashy sense, but she became loved in a more genuine way. She sang at schools, hospitals, and community gatherings. She turned down offers that felt dishonest, but she accepted those that aligned with her heart. Slowly, she built a path that was true to her values. People began calling her the voice of sincerity. To her, those words mattered more than any trophy. Eventually, another charity concert was organized, even bigger than the ones before. Thousands of people came, filling an open-air stadium. The organizers once again invited both the woman and the famous singer. She accepted with calmness, while he hesitated, but finally agreed. He knew this might be his chance to face the mistake of his past. The night of the event was electric. The crowd buzzed with excitement, waiting for the performances. When the famous singer walked on stage, the cheers were polite but not as strong as they once were. He sang one of his greatest hits, and though his voice was still powerful, the applause lacked the old spark. He bowed, accepting the truth silently. Then the woman appeared. She walked onto the stage in her modest dress, the same simple hairstyle, the same quiet smile. The audience erupted in cheers, louder than thunder, waving their hands and calling her name. She placed her hand over her chest, humbled, and whispered thank you. When she began to sing, the stadium grew silent. Her voice floated across the night air, soft at first, then strong and steady. People closed their eyes, swaying to the sound. Some held hands, others cried quietly, and many recorded, knowing they were witnessing something unforgettable. When her song ended, the crowd stood up, clapping and cheering endlessly. Some shouted her name, others begged for another song. She smiled, tears in her eyes, and bowed again. In that moment, she realized that life had given her a gift she never expected. What was meant to break her had lifted her higher. Backstage, the famous singer approached her. For the first time, his proud posture was gone. His voice was soft, almost humble. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I tried to mock you, but instead you showed me what true music is. You reminded me of why I started singing. I forgot along the way. Thank you for teaching me." The woman looked at him, surprised. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. With a gentle smile, she replied, it's never too late to sing from the heart." The singer nodded, his eyes moist. That night, he performed again, but differently. He sang not for fame, not for applause, but with honesty. The crowd noticed the change, and for the first time in a long while, they cheered for him with warmth. It was not the wild adoration of the past, but it was genuine respect. As the evening ended, the woman left the stage quietly, just as she always did, with humility and grace. But the people who had heard her would carry her voice in their hearts for years to come. She had not only sung a song, she had sung a truth that reminded everyone that greatness can come from anywhere, even the most ordinary life. The story of that night became legendary. People told it again and again, how a famous singer tried to mock a simple woman, and how she shocked the world with the power of her sincerity. Children learned it as a lesson about kindness. Artists remembered it whenever they felt pride. And audiences everywhere carried it as proof that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places. The simple woman returned to her quiet home, unchanged in her soul. She never allowed fame to control her. She lived with gratitude, always singing when her heart called her to. And though she remained humble, the world never forgot the night her voice rose against mockery and became something unforgettable. In the end, the famous singer's career survived, but it was different. He became less arrogant, more thoughtful, and even started supporting young artists instead of mocking them. He always remembered the woman who had taught him humility with nothing more than her voice. And so, the tale was sealed in memory. A simple woman, once invisible in a grand hall, had shown the world that true power does not come from pride or fame, but from honesty, courage, and a heart that dares to be heard.